Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Honig here, and I'm going to be walking you guys through the operations when you have any type of rational number. We have discussed already and solved problems where we know how to solve, where we just have both fractions, any operation, add, subtract, multiply, divide. We've done them with both decimals, add, subtract, multiply, divide. But now, what happens when we have a fraction and a decimal, both in the same problem? And this also is the same process as if you were to work with 3, 4, 5 different rational numbers. So again, rational numbers, we know that these are any number that you can write as a fraction. That's the definition of a rational number. So we have to be able to work between both decimals and fractions here. Okay? Our goal is to do one of two things. Either we want both terms to be fractions so we can operate, or we want both terms, or all terms if there's more than two, to be both decimals to operate. Okay? This is where we want to look. The only way they will both be decimals, this is what we talked about in our last lesson, is if both decimals are terminating decimals. We can then operate with both terms being decimals because we physically have a decimal that ends in a 0. So we could write something like 0.5 minus 0.4. We can operate there. If it's a repeating decimal, like 0.16 repeating, we're never going to be 100% exact if we are subtracting, adding, doing whatever to that decimal in that case. Okay? So we need them to be terminating decimals in order for us to operate in both decimals. Okay? So now we are going to make that distinction. So we have to take a look at 5 1/3. Here's my fraction. I have to ask myself, is 1/3 a terminating decimal? We should already know that 1/3 is 0.3 repeating, which means it is not. And that tells me I am going to work with both fractions here. So that tells me I'm going to make the 5 1/3 the same thing. I'm not going to change it. And I'm actually going to change the negative 2.4. So now we go to our place value and we say to ourselves, the 4 here, this is another way to say it, is 4/10. So I could write this as negative 2 4/10. Or to be a little bit quicker, I could also reduce that fraction. I want to reduce that fraction when possible. So I will make that negative 2 2/5. I just divided numerator and denominator by 2. Okay? Now I can operate. So now what I'm going to look to do is I could possibly work here where I work with the mixed numbers. I'm not going to go that route because I actually have to find a common denominator as we talked about prior. Okay? So I'm going to use our little check mark method to turn these into improper fractions. 5 times 3 plus 1, denominator 3. 15 plus 1, 16. So I have 16/3 plus, and I know this is already negative, so I'm going to drop my negative sign in, and then I just multiply it as normal. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 2 is negative 12/5. And now I start to look with my common denominator. So the least common multiple between 3 and 5 is 15. I multiply the negative 12/5 by 3/3. I multiply the 16/3 by 5/5. And then I write my new quantities down below. So now I have 5 times 16 is 80. 80/15 plus a negative. This becomes 36. Negative 36/15. And now I can just operate. So now I take a look. I know my denominator is the same, so that is going to stay the same in my final solution. And now we have to think about I'm adding a negative, which is the same as just saying, hey, I am just subtracting in here. So I'm just going to take 80 minus 36. And we are done. We're done with, what do we got? 44. So I got 44/15. I can leave it like that, or if I really wanted to, I could use long division, and I can make it a mixed number. As long as this is reduced, we're okay. So I'm just going to divide 15 into 44. Goes in twice. So that's 30, and I'm actually left with 14/0. So both are okay in that case. Same thing is true with multiplication and division over here. So now I ask myself, terminating or repeating decimal, and this is up to you. If I look at 3/4, that's 0.75. So I could work with both of these being decimals, okay? Depending on your comfortability with it, you can make them both decimals and then divide, or you can make them both fractions and then divide. I'm going to choose to actually make them both fractions, so I'm going to make this negative 12 and 9/10, and I'm going to divide that by 3/4. You'll see why I do that in a minute, okay? I'm going to use my check mark method again, and I'm going to multiply negative 12 times 10, which is negative 120 plus 9. That becomes negative 129 over 10, divided by 3/4. And then I'm going to come down, and I'm going to actually go with our method of our keep, our change, our flip. So now that becomes negative 129 over 10 times 4/3. Remember, that flip, it's actually called our reciprocal. So we're multiplying by the reciprocal now. And now we get a chance to look and cross-reduce if possible. So I look here and I look at 10 and 4. I do have the ability to cross-reduce by a common factor of 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 4 divided by 2 is 2. I look at the same thing as I look diagonally across with 129 and 3. Actually, they both reduce by 3. So I'm going to reduce them. This one will stay negative in here. Okay? This actually becomes negative 43. And now I can just multiply straight across. Negative 43 times 2 becomes negative 86 over 5 times 1 is 5. You could leave it like that, or if you wanted to, 5 goes into 86 17 times, so that becomes a negative, and then I have that 1 left over, so negative 17 and a fifth.